Hello and welcome back to one of my videos. I'm just going to show you a quick demonstration of what the procedure is before a new painting session. So these are the paints which were left over from yesterday, and since they're oil paints, I tend to use the Georgian and Winton range. Very easily accessible. But what I tend to do is just ensure that there is enough paint on the palette for painting for a good few hours. Now that depends. I don't exactly know how much paint I will require for the painting session. But the idea is just to make sure that the muddy, messy colours are kind of out the way, so there's enough space for actually mixing the paints. It's a very messy process, and I tend to go through loads of these tissues, which you can see. It's just completely covered. So many tissues. The idea is that we want to make sure that this is a very small palette, and if I could extend this, but for now this is what I'm working with, so I'd kind of have to make do with that. And I like to save my muddy colours as well, so this is a combination of loads of colours mixed together, which I can use in the background if I want to. Of course, you can discard it if you want to. You don't necessarily have to keep your greys. However, I am painting Alla Prima Impasto. Impasto means literally just to use heavy texture to paste with Italian, is what it means. I think it's Italian. But as you can see, literally just using the paint straight from the tube. If I want to, I'll incorporate some linseed or walnut oil. And basically it just makes it a bit more creamy, and because obviously some paints come out of the tube very thick. If you've left the paint, if it's an old tube of paint especially, it can get quite thick inside. So this is just to condition it, not necessarily, pre-mixing it. It's just to make sure it's applicable for my paintings. And this can be a tedious process, so in this time I like to be really quick and just shift paint straight to the side, incorporate other colours just to keep it consistent, if that makes sense. If I have too many muddy colours, then I tend to get overwhelmed, but people love using muddy colours, so it's up to you. You'll notice sometimes the paint gets it just starts drying up. These are just layers from the days before, and you can just discard those areas of where it has dried. You don't want that. What tends to happen is if it dries on the palette for too long, and you keep using the same palette, you can get bits of oil paint chunks in the painting itself, and you don't want that, which is why this process for painting impasto with oils is very important, especially if you want to do this what's the word? If you don't want to completely get rid of your palette, if you want to keep these colours, and for most of us, we do want to keep our paints because they can be expensive. But the process is just making do with what you've got, just making sure that the paints are where they're supposed to be, and you've got rid of all your muddy colours, and you've kept your greys, and there's enough mixing space. Now, of course, like I said, if I had more space to mix my oil paints on, I may have just left this. But this kind of works for me, and I've gotten used to it, so it's just the way I roll. So yeah, you'll see that this yellow here has been completely contaminated with other colours. Because there's so much of it, it doesn't matter. I can just kind of mix it back in, and we've still got that yellow. It's not going to change, because there's so much yellow in there. It's not going to change drastically, and I can kind of keep that really. There's not much harm in keeping that. Like I said, we're just making sure colours are consistent and there's no nothing's been too contaminated, and you've kept your muddy colours. So you can just watch the rest of the process. I'm just gonna be shifting paint basically, shifting paint, making space for the colours that I do need. And that's the white, which I just go through so much of. It's important that I have lots of white on the palette for the type of painting that I do. I've always been a fan of heavy texture. Even when I was using acrylics, I would always be pushed towards the heavy body Daler and Rowney Kryler acrylic paints, which were great for heavy texture, and I would mix that with some textured heavy texture gel, which is a great alternative if you don't want to use oil paints, or you find that oil paints are a bit too daunting. It's a great alternative option for you. So this is probably not even enough white. I'm going to get my paint wringer out, which always helps. If you do get a paint wringer, make sure you have the one that's padded around here, because I find when you're doing this, it can bring a lot of strain to this part of the area, especially if you've got a thick tube of oil paint. So make sure you invest in a really good wringer, because these are really cheap. So you want to make sure you have a good one. I learned the hard way. Oh, you see, it's just so painful. And it shouldn't be painful, but, you know. There we go. Oh, it's a lot of paint. There we go. That should be enough for, like, 4 paintings. Up to 4. I was going to say at least. It's definitely not at least 4. It's up to 4. There we go. I'm going to add a splash of linseed oil. I haven't made the change to walnut oil yet. I haven't tried that out. Apparently it reduces yellowing in your painting, so that's always an option. I don't use any solvents, so literally linseed oil is my medium. It's the medium I use to clean my brushes and to condition my paint with. Just want to make sure it's incorporated. You don't want to keep it patchy where there's areas where the oil hasn't fully incorporated, and areas where it's too oily. And you don't want puddles. You want to make sure it's well incorporated. That's a given, really. I mean, if you do this, if you practice oil painting, and you do something similar, this is very straightforward. Ultimately, this just makes applying the paint more, much more easy. So I can still use all this paint on this side. I'm normally very quick with this. I'm just trying to be a bit more demonstrative to how I do it. Because I like to get painting straight away, really. So I'd rather not do this process, but it's crucial for me. Some people can just get away with continuing painting, but I find that you need it becomes a hassle when you get layers of dried oil paint which accumulate over time. You don't want that unless that works for you. You will go through loads of paper roll as well, or a rag if you want to use an oil rag. Whatever works for you. The only reason I don't use oil rags is because, or a fabric cloth is, I can get rid of these tissues. With a rag, it stays in the studio, and I don't like the idea of having oil-ridden rags in the studio. I just don't like the idea of that. It's a bit of a hazard as well. There we go. I want to make space for this crimson, alizarin crimson, so I might put it in between my red and magenta. Just want to make sure I have enough space to make that possible. Again, like, I do need a larger palette, but this is what I'm working with. I hope this is informative. Do let me know in the comments below. I don't make these videos often, so I'm trying to be good, and I'm trying to engage with the fellow artists here on YouTube, and people wanting to learn. Because until now, I've just been making time lapses, and I'm sure people want to know what happens behind the scenes. And behind the scenes of the painter. If you do collect my work, you'll know that I churn out a lot of paintings on a daily basis. You probably want to know how that happens, and this is one of the processes to ensure that I maintain that productivity. Alizarin Crimson is a very stiff oil paint. I'm not sure what the Winton Alizarin Crimson is like, but I find that the Georgian one is very, very stiff. So it requires more linseed oil, or medium, of your choice. A good way to tell if you have to discard the oil paint is just to ensure that when you are mixing it, it's not too tacky. If it's too tacky, you may want to discard it because it's starting to dry. And what's going to happen is once you apply that to the canvas, it's going to be super thick, and it's because it's almost like half dried. It's not going to give the best texture. It's not going to look great. Again, some people love that technique of like half-dried oil paint in their work, but it would completely ruin what I'm going for. In terms of how, like, the quality of my work, I'd rather not have. I like consistency, so I want to make sure all my paints are the same consistency for this to work. Is ultimately what I'm saying. So I'm just checking, I might put some more Viridian or Phthalo green, in this case, Phthalo green. I'll squelch that out, there we go. Don't need a ringer for that. I don't go through too much green. It's beautiful when you mix this with phthalo blue and you get a really nice aquatic blue, which is fabulous for like Mediterranean seascapes. You should definitely try that out. I'm not one for landscapes. I used to be, but these days I tend to paint more still life and flowers more than I paint landscapes. It's just a preference. And I tend to go into landscapes every other month. I like to dabble with landscapes now and again. So you can gauge the consistency very quickly. I would say that's about right. There's definitely some dried oil paint underneath, but I'm going to ignore that for now because I am running out of time and I should get painting. That's the whole point of this. It's very easy to get carried away with the I was going to say the behind the scenes, but yeah, with the mandatory stuff I have to do before I paint. It gets tedious, and what I tend to do is just watch YouTube videos or listen to podcasts while I do this. And then my brain gets taken, my mind goes elsewhere and it takes me out of the idea of painting. And then I have to engage back in with what I'm doing. So don't get too lost in the process of doing this. Maybe because I've been doing it for so long, I don't know. Let's scrape some of this off. So it's got lumps in there, which I don't want, so I'm going to discard that. And that should do for now. I may need more cadmium yellow. I use cadmium yellow and red. I'm obsessed with cadmium yellow. I find that the hue isn't as effective, and I would love to not use the real cadmiums, but I just think they give such a beautiful colour, and for that reason I'm going to continue using them. It's the only toxic thing I have in my studio, and I do wear gloves, but of course I do get paint on my hands as well, so it's always a good precaution. Do wear gloves if you can. Yeah, and if you have any more questions, do let me know. This is the process. Just going to quickly mix in my black as well. This is Winton black, which is very smooth, so I don't need to incorporate that with any linseed. We're just going to mix that in straight away. This is very therapeutic. If you do this for the first few days of your painting, if you get into painting and you start doing this, you find that it's very therapeutic. And if you're like me, after a year or so, you realise it becomes a chore, but it's something you have to do. But there we go. That's my palette ready for painting. And yeah, well, like I said, if you have any more questions, do let me know. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back with another video soon.